What if the world's most feared conqueror wasn't just a warlord, but the architect of a global tax empire? Picture the Asian steppe at dawn. A cold wind sweeps across endless grasslands. In the distance, a black banner flutters above a sea of horsemen, Genghis Khan's Mongol horde poised to change the world. Most remember the Mongols for their terror, cities in flames, walls shattered, rulers kneeling in the dust. But behind the thunder of hooves was something even more powerful, a system. A machine that turned fear into profit and conquest into a business model. As the Mongols swept from China to Europe, they didn't just take gold and grain. They demanded tribute, imposed taxes, and built a network of collectors, scribes, and enforcers. For the first time, a single empire controlled the Silk Road from end to end, turning chaos into commerce and terror into a steady stream of revenue. What if the real Mongol weapon wasn't the bow, but the ledger? How did a nomad army invent a system that outlasted their own empire? Coming up, the business model that made the world's largest land empire rich. But how did Genghis Khan's tax machine work? And why does its shadow still stretch across the world today? Step into the year 1206, a gathering of Mongol tribes on the open steppe. The air is thick with tension and hope as Temujin, soon to be known as Genghis Khan, is declared the Great Khan at the Kurultai. A new era begins, not just for the Mongols, but for the world. Genghis Khan's genius isn't just in battle, it's in organization. He unites warring clans with a code, the Yassa, laying down rules for loyalty, justice, and, crucially, tribute. The Mongol war machine rolls west. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand fall in days. The Khwarezmian Empire, once mighty, is reduced to ashes. But after the flames die down, the real work begins. Mongol envoys ride out, not just to demand surrender, but to set the terms of survival. Pay tribute, gold, grain, livestock, or silk, and your city will be spared. Refuse and face annihilation. This is more than extortion. It's the birth of a tax system. The Mongols appoint local officials, sometimes even former enemies, to collect and deliver tribute. They introduce tax farming, letting contractors bid for the right to collect taxes in exchange for a share of the profits. The message spreads fast. It's cheaper to pay the Khan than to fight him. Rival kings and merchants, terrified by stories of Mongol wrath, line up to pay. Caravans loaded with silver and spices cross the steppe, guarded by Mongol patrols. A new kind of order emerges, one built on fear, but sustained by profit. The dust of conquest settles. A new world order emerges, one that stretches from the Yellow Sea to the gates of Vienna. This is the age of the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For the first time in centuries, merchants can travel the Silk Road without fear of bandits or border wars. Caravans snake across the steppe, their bells jingling in the dawn. From China, silk and porcelain. From Persia, carpets and spices. From Europe, silver and glass. But this peace isn't free. At every checkpoint, Mongol officials collect tariffs and tribute. The postal system, an innovation of the Khans, links the empire with a network of relay stations, fresh horses, and armed guards. Messages, gold, and goods move faster than ever before. Karakorum, the Mongol capital, becomes a crossroads of the world. Persian scribes, Chinese engineers, and Venetian traders all gather in its bustling markets. Even Marco Polo, the legendary Venetian explorer, marvels at the order and wealth he finds under Mongol rule. The Mongols tax everything, goods, land, even the right to travel. But in return, they offer something rare, security. Merchants who once feared for their lives now pay willingly, knowing the Khan's law will protect them. The Silk Road booms, trade volume explodes. The Mongol Empire becomes not just the world's largest land empire, but its richest. How did the world's most feared warriors become the world's richest customs agents? What happens when terror gives way to trade? But the Mongol tax machine had a dark side and a breaking point. After Genghis Khan's death, the empire splits into 4 great khanates: the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. Each is a massive state in its own right, and each inherits the Mongol business model. But with great wealth comes great temptation. The system of tax farming, once efficient, becomes a breeding ground for corruption. Local tax farmers, motivated by profit, begin to squeeze the populace dry. They demand more and more, far beyond what the central Khan had ordered. In Persia, the Ilkhanate faces a financial crisis. The governor Ghazan Khan discovers his tax collectors are bleeding the peasants dry, leading to widespread poverty and rebellion. His solution? Radical reform. He standardizes tax rates, publishes them on stone tablets for everyone to see, and punishes corrupt officials. For a time it works. The economy recovers and the state's coffers are filled again. Meanwhile, in China, Kublai Khan, Genghis's grandson, establishes the Yuan dynasty. He introduces paper money, the chow, as the official currency of the empire. It's a revolutionary idea. Instead of hauling heavy coins, merchants can use lightweight paper notes for transactions across the empire. It's the world's first widespread use of fiat currency, backed not by gold, but by the power of the Khan. This system supercharges commerce, making trade easier and more efficient than ever before, but it also holds the seeds of its own destruction. The government, needing more funds, simply prints more money. Inflation spirals out of control. The value of the paper currency plummets, and the public loses faith in the system. Economic chaos ensues, contributing to the eventual collapse of Mongol rule in China. The Mongol tax empire was a paradox. It was built on the fear of the sword, but maintained by the promise of the purse. It fostered unprecedented global trade, but its methods often led to brutal exploitation. The Pax Mongolica created a connected world, allowing not just goods and ideas to travel, but also disease. The Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century, spread along the very trade routes the Mongols had secured. In a sense, the system that made the empire rich also helped to bring about its downfall. So, what is the legacy of the Mongol economic machine? The idea of a standardized, state-run tax system, the concept of paper currency, the importance of secure trade routes, these didn't die with the Mongol Empire. They were absorbed and adapted by the empires that followed. The Russian Khazars learned from the Golden Horde. The Ming Dynasty in China continued many of the Yuan's economic policies. The Silk Road, once a path of Mongol tribute, became the blueprint for modern global trade. When we look at the world today, at global supply chains, international tariffs, and even the digital currency revolution, we can see the faint echoes of the Mongol system. A system born on the steppe, built by horsemen who understood that true power wasn't just about conquering territory, but controlling its wealth. The story of Genghis Khan isn't just a tale of brutal conquest. It's the story of how a nomadic army accidentally created the foundations of our modern economic world. The real Mongol legacy isn't the ruins of cities, it's the network that connects them. Hey, have you ever looked at your paycheck and wondered, where did this whole tax thing even come from? We think of taxes as a modern headache, but what if I told you the blueprint was designed 800 years ago by the most feared conqueror in history? This is the story of the Mongol Empire's greatest weapon. Not the bow, not the horse, but the tax ledger, and how its ghost still haunts your wallet today. When Genghis Khan's armies swept across Asia, they weren't just conquering, they were creating the world's first global corporation. The product? Security? The price? A tax system so efficient it would make the IRS blush. For decades it worked like magic. The Mongol Empire became a giant free trade zone policed by the most feared army on earth. A merchant could travel from Venice to Beijing with a single Mongol passport, a golden tablet called a paisa, knowing they were protected. In exchange for this safety, you paid your dues. Taxes were predictable, often around 10%. You could pay in silk, grain, gold, or even labor. This system, the yam, wasn't just about collecting money. It was a sophisticated network of roads, postal stations, and armed guards. It turned terror into a profitable, predictable business model. The result? The Silk Road flourished like never before. Ideas, inventions, and goods flowed freely. Marco Polo was stunned. He saw a world connected by commerce, all underwritten by the Khan's authority. For a while, the Mongol tax machine wasn't a burden. It was the engine of global prosperity. The sword conquered the land, but it was the ledger that built the empire. But what happens when a system built on ruthless efficiency starts to break down? By the mid-1200s, the Mongol Empire, once a single unified powerhouse, began to crack. Genghis Khan's grandsons weren't interested in sharing. They carved the empire into rival kingdoms, or khanates, each hungry for power and, more importantly, for revenue. The unified tax system splintered. Suddenly, there wasn't one taxman, but four, each trying to out-tax the other to fund their armies and lavish courts. And this is where the real trouble began: corruption. The Khans started outsourcing their dirty work. They hired tax farmers, private contractors who bid for the right to collect taxes in a certain region. Their business model was simple: pay the Khan a fixed amount and keep whatever extra you could squeeze out of the population. It was a recipe for disaster. These tax farmers were merciless. They descended on villages and cities like vultures, armed with the Khan's authority but driven by personal greed. They seized harvests, confiscated property, and threw people into debt slavery. Bribes became the only way to survive. Justice was sold to the highest bidder. The very system designed to create order was now sowing chaos and resentment. Imagine you're a peasant in Mongol-controlled Persia. For a generation, your family paid a fair, predictable tax. You knew what to expect. In return, Mongol soldiers kept bandits off the roads. But now, everything has changed. The local tax farmer arrives, demanding double what you paid last year. He claims it's a new decree from a distant Khan you've never heard of. He takes your grain, your livestock, and even the silver ornaments your wife inherited. Your neighbor, who couldn't pay, was beaten and his son taken as a servant. The promise of Mongol law, the Yassa, feels like a cruel joke. Or picture yourself as a merchant. You once eagerly paid for safe passage on the Silk Road. Now you're stopped at 3 different borders, each controlled by a rival Mongol prince, and each demands a hefty toll. Your profits vanish. The journey becomes a gamble. Slowly, people began to look for other routes, avoiding the Mongol-controlled lands altogether. The economic engine of the empire began to sputter. In the countryside, resentment simmered and boiled over. The people who were once protected subjects of the empire now saw themselves as its victims. The taxman, once a symbol of order, had become more feared than the Mongol warrior himself. The final act of this story unfolds in China, the jewel of the Mongol Empire. Here, Kublai Khan had established the Yuan dynasty, a new imperial line that tried to blend Mongol rule with Chinese traditions. But the rot of corruption had spread too far. The government was bloated, the officials were greedy, and the taxes were crushing. Natural disasters like floods and famines made a desperate situation unbearable. The Chinese people, who had endured foreign rule for nearly a century, had finally had enough. A massive uprising known as the Red Turban Rebellion erupted across the countryside. It was a grassroots movement fueled by peasant anger and a desire to restore Chinese rule. The rebels weren't just fighting soldiers, they were fighting the entire corrupt system. They burned government offices, killed tax collectors, and rallied the population to their cause. The once invincible Mongol armies, now divided and poorly led, couldn't stop them. By 1368, the rebels had captured the capital. The last Mongol emperor fled back to the steppes, and the great Yuan dynasty collapsed. The world's richest empire, which once stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe, had been brought down not by a foreign invader, but from within. It unraveled because it broke its own promise. The tax machine that built the empire ultimately became the instrument of its destruction. So, is that the end of the story? A cautionary tale from the dusty pages of history? Not at all, because the Mongol tax machine never really disappeared. Its DNA is all around us. Picture a Mongol tax collector on horseback, his ledger in hand riding from village to village. Now picture a modern customs agent at an airport, scanning barcodes and stamping passports, centuries apart. But the fundamental mission is the same: collect revenue, control movement, and keep the system running. The Mongols taxed goods, land, and people, demanding tribute in gold, grain, or silk. Today, governments levy income taxes, tariffs, and sales taxes, tracking every transaction with digital precision. The tools have changed. Bows and banners have been replaced by spreadsheets and software, but the core principles remain eerily similar. Both systems promise a trade-off. The Mongols offered security on the Silk Road. Modern states promise roads, schools, and social safety nets. But both also face the exact same risks: the temptation to squeeze too hard, the creep of corruption, and the resentment that grows when a system feels unfair. Are today's complex tax codes just a more sophisticated version of Mongol tribute? Is the tax agency so different from the Khan's envoys? The echoes are everywhere. The story of power, profit, and the price of control never truly ends. So what's the big lesson here? What can Genghis Khan's grand economic experiment teach us today? It's both a blueprint and a warning. The Mongols proved that, true, lasting power isn't just about military might, it's about the systems you build afterward. It's about creating incentives, managing resources, and earning the trust, or at least the compliance, of the governed. For a time, their empire was a masterclass in turning conquest into a functioning, profitable enterprise. But they also showed us how quickly it can all fall apart. When greed replaced governance, when the collectors became more feared than the protectors, the entire structure became brittle. The same system that connected the world also contained the seeds of its own collapse. Today, every government, every multinational corporation, and in a way, every one of us, faces the same fundamental questions. How do you balance profit with fairness? How do you keep a system from becoming corrupt and oppressive? And what happens when the people who run the system forget who it's supposed to serve? The past isn't dead. It's hiding in every paycheck, every border crossing, and every tax return. The choices we make today are echoes of the choices the Khans made centuries ago. Will the next global power rule with fear or with finance? Will we learn from the past, or are we doomed to repeat its cycles? The answers are all there if you just know where to look. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this kind of cinematic economic history and want to learn how ancient empires still secretly shape your life and your wallet, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell.